a look at the module 6 and you take a look at what that chapter, it's a very short chapter, but when you take a look at that chapter, you kind of see that the main ideas from Piaget and Vygotsky were discussed, and we posted some of those from the module onto the board. And you'll recall that one of the things that both Piaget and Vygotsky that ties them together is the constructive nature. They're both constructivists. The idea behind constructivism is that knowledge is built upon prior learning, prior knowledge, prior experiences, and that both of them talked about how there is certainly a biological aspects to this, but that really it is the experiential nature of everyday life that adds to our learning and how we learn. So, if you recap Piaget, one of the things that most people associate with him is the stage theory, the stage ideas behind it. So, we start off with the sensory motor, we go to pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operation. And those are really, great ideas, well documented, talks about different things that the kids can do at different ages, at different stages. But really, Piaget didn't focus that much on the stage aspect of it as much so as the transition between those stages. So, for instance, what you'll notice is that when you read the chapter, they discuss that Piaget talks about the qualitative shifts in their ability to think, or how they move from concrete to formal, or from pre-operationals to concrete, and how their thinking and their reasoning has just dramatically changes. And so that's kind of this idea behind the stage theory. And you can look in the chapter, and they'll talk about some of the main points behind the different stages. But what I really want to focus on is, as a teacher dealing with K-12 learning environment, is how do we use this stuff? Okay, and one of the things that, and I told you before, that Piaget and his biological, or no, I shouldn't say biological, but his biology training, he had to develop a model for how it is that people think. And what he did was he kind of piggybacked on this idea of well, if you're going to create a model, you got to have something that's going to be the foundation. In biology, we talk about the cell. In Piagetian terms, or in Piaget's theory, it's the scheme. Schema, schemata, scheme. And one way to think about that is that the scheme serves as a mental snapshot. So I think we did the examples in class. When you hear the word grocery store, you get a snapshot. To some of you, instantly think of Hy-Vee, or you think of Walmart, or you think of Jewel, or you think of Kroger's, or wherever your grocery store is. Sometimes people will envision, when I say grocery store, they think of the aisles, they think of the produce. That's okay, you're inside the grocery store. And you have a very vivid picture of what it is that it looks like. So you're looking down the aisles, you see all the boxes, you see all the canned goods, et cetera, et cetera. I say to you, back out of that, step back out, camera out, and you get further, you step outside, you look up on the building, and you see the name of the store that you're at. Okay, so think of a scheme or a schema as kind of that mental snapshot. I have a term, a concept, and something comes to mind. We use the example of, if I said hardware store, many of you think of Lowe's, you think of Ace Hardware, you think of Menards, whatever it might be, right? And so the idea is these schemes represent concepts, represent ideas. And so that's the foundation. That's what we're building on. From a constructive nature, we have these foundations, this foundation of pictures, of snapshots. We're constantly building on these. How do we do that? So Piaget talks about learning through a two-step process, okay? And he talks about assimilation and accommodation. Well, when you think about assimilation, the idea is that we're trying to work from a framework or a set of schemes that we already have in place. Anytime we get to a new novel problem, something that's new, we're trying to solve it, we're trying to figure it out, the first thing that we rely on is what we already know, the schemes that we have in place. So we naturally try to assimilate. Now, when that doesn't work, we got to make some changes. Okay, we have to accommodate. What does it mean to accommodate? Well, it means that we're going to have to either modify an existing scheme or we're going to have to create a whole new scheme altogether. Now, think back for a minute. I put the problem up on the board, and we had the 9 times 4 equals 13. Well, now if you represent that problem, 9 and the 4 below that, line, x to the side, 13. At first glance, everybody laughs, thinks, well, 9 times 4 is not 13. Somebody screwed up. They meant to say addition. Well, if you put that in the context of a third grader, or I shouldn't even say that, probably a second grader, first grader, second grader, and you put that problem of 9 times 4, and you set it up, and you're looking at it, well, naturally, we look at them and say they thought the x was a plus. Well, I don't know that that's what they were thinking. They just got it wrong. Now I need to understand why they got it wrong. Now, from an assimilation and accommodation standpoint, I can figure that out. What do I need to know? Okay. Well, my natural thought is they made a mistake. They thought the x was a plus sign. Well, maybe they did. Maybe they don't know what x stands for. And when they don't know what x stands for, they rely on or go back to what they already know. That's assimilation. What do they go back to? Addition. They know addition. All right, so they put 9 times 4 equals 13. Now I look back, and that's why we ask students to show their work in solving problems, sentence diagramming, physics problems, chemistry problems, math problems, whatever it is. We ask that they show their work because we need to understand as teachers where their mistake. If they make a mistake, where did it come from? Okay, was it a simple misunderstanding? Or is it maybe something that's conceptual? Maybe they don't really understand this yet. Maybe they don't have a scheme in place for multiplication. They don't know what x means. And if they don't know what x means, I got to help them create a new scheme. So I show them and I say, well, that x means groups. We're representing groups. So 9 groups of 4 equals 36. So now they create a new scheme. When they see the x, they know that means multiplication. Problem is set up the same way. 9 plus 4 equals 13. 9 times 4 equals 36. They look very much alike, but that one little symbol, x versus a plus, means that they need to modify or create a new scheme. So that's that assimilation and accommodation problem or idea. Now think back for a second for the Japanograms, when we did those little Japanograms in class. Now, as you guys were solving those problems, the things that people wear in Japanese, when you're communicating with your partner, you didn't know what those katakana characters were, so you needed to kind of say, hey, look for this. And then your partner says, look for what? Well, look for the 7 with the 2 dots. Look for the Nike swoosh. Look for the running man. Look for the box. Look for the eye. Look for, you guys gave them English terms, schemes that you have in place for what that image looked like. It was just the easiest way to communicate with your partner. Makes total sense. What do? You use what you have. So that Japanogram exercise was, they call it a Piagetian exercise, because you guys had to work through both assimilation and accommodation in order to solve those problems. You relied on what you know to solve the problems at first. Now, other terms that you'll see in the book and what we discussed in class is you'll see that we talked about this idea of equilibration or creating disequilibrium. Okay, what is equilibration? Equilibration is the idea of going in and out of equilibrium. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, when you have a full grasp of the content of what the teacher's talking about, the problems that you're doing, You're in a state of equilibrium. Everything adds up. Makes total sense. I can solve the problem with what I already know. Everything's fine. Well, what happens when the teacher throws a little curve? Suddenly you're conjugating verbs from Spanish. You guys have done this 100 times, with those of you taking Spanish. You're going from the as to amos. The we. You guys have done it, right? Conjugating verbs. So you go from hablar, okay, and you work through this. You know how to do it again and again and again. Then suddenly the teacher throws a curve at you, and you get an irregular verb. You get this irregular verb, and you go to apply, and the teacher's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! You can't do that. It's not a regular verb. It's irregular. You have to do something different. It's this." It's like, "Oh crap! That doesn't follow the same line of reasoning." So now you have to create a new scheme, or you got to think a little bit differently about conjugating a verb that you didn't have to do before. Okay, that's a modification. That's an accommodation. Well, what happened is the teacher asked you to solve this problem, and you naturally went to what you've learned, how to conjugate a verb. And suddenly they give you this irregular verb, and it doesn't add up. It doesn't work the same way. And now you're in a state of disequilibrium, and you're like, what do I do? Okay. Well, what happens is the teacher gives you a scheme for that. The teacher works through that. You look up in the book, you figure it out. And once you figure it out and you have a new scheme for how to conjugate this irregular verb, then you go back into a state of equilibrium. Or if the teacher is teaching you how to do an algebra problem, you're thinking about solving for x, all right? And you've got 27x equals 9, okay? And you're like, 27x equals 9. I need to solve for x. What is x? Now, what do you need to do? You don't know how to do that, so the teacher shows you the problem that you got to divide by 27 in order to get x on its side, on one side all by itself, okay, the numbers on the other side. Well, if you didn't have a scheme for that, you didn't know what to do. So the teacher shows you the process, okay, but at first you were in a state of disequilibrium because you didn't know what to do. The teacher works through the problem. What happens? You create a new scheme. I need to get x by itself on on the other side of the equal sign. So now I've got a scheme in place, and what happens? You're back in a state of equilibrium. That's that process of equilibration. I'm in equilibrium. Teacher throws a curve at me. I'm in a state of disequilibrium. The teacher shows me a new way of doing it, gives me a new scheme, explains it. I look in a book. I go on Google, whatever it is. You figure out that new scheme, and you're like, I got it. Now I know what to do. What happened? You're back in a state of equilibrium. And that's what we do every day. We go through this process. Equilibrium, disequilibrium, back into a state of equilibrium. Now, what is disequilibrium? Disequilibrium is this idea of mental discomfort. Okay? Mental discomfort. Something's not adding up. Something's not working the right way for me. And since it's not working the right way, I don't like that. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I use the example in class. We talk about that tip of the tongue phenomenon. Somebody's talking and they say, "Oh, do you remember that teacher we had, or do you remember that celebrity that was in this movie?" And they start talking about it, and you're like, "Oh yeah, yeah. What's his name? What's his name? Or what's her name?" And then the teacher or somebody goes, "Oh, skip it. Let's move on." Well, man, sometimes if it's a band that we liked, that we used to listen to, and they're talking about this song, it's like, oh my God, I got to remember that name. I got to remember the song. It's like, what's the name of the song? What's the name of the song? And the person just keeps talking, and all you hear is wah 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 wah, because you're just focusing on what's the name of that song. Okay, what happened was they got you in a state of mental discomfort, that tip of the tongue, and you can't move on until you can remember the name. And suddenly when you remember the name of the singer or the actor or the song or the date or whatever it is, it's like, oh, that feels so much better now. Now you can go ahead and talk. I'm listening again, right? All right. So what does that mean for us as teachers in our classroom? Now, Piaget talks about our job is to create disequilibrium in the classroom. Our job is to create cognitive conflict. Sometimes you've heard the word cognitive dissonance. Okay, we've got to create a state of mental discomfort, a state of disequilibrium, because that mental discomfort. Piaget talks about how we're naturally curious, how we naturally want to. We don't feel good in a state of disequilibrium. We want to work our way out of it, and so we need to create some disequilibrium. Okay, why do we need to do that? Well, it's in a state of disequilibrium where students have got to make accommodations. They've got to change a scheme, modify a scheme, create a new scheme. And to do that, that's where they get out of from disequilibrium back into equilibrium. Well, where does learning take place? It takes place in accommodation. Well, if learning takes place in accommodation, I've got to make them try to accommodate. I've got to create disequilibrium. Okay. So as a teacher, and I use the example in class, as a teacher, when you're talking to your students about stuff that is overly simplistic and they get it and it's kind of boring, it's below their cognitive level. They're not in a state of disequilibrium. They get it. They understand it. They've already learned this. What do? They just start zoning out. They start doing other things, monkeying around at the table, classroom management problems. It doesn't motivate them. They don't feel a need to listen because they already got it. The same thing is true when you're a teacher and you're talking over their heads. You're using concepts and terms and examples that the students can't relate to whatsoever. You're not creating disequilibrium because they don't even understand what you're talking about. So they just start to zone out. They start to do other things. They want to play on their phone. They want to doodle. They want to talk with their friends. And what we need to do as teachers is we need to kind of create the conditions where the students want to get out of that disequilibrium. Well, that means you have to find the appropriate distance. I use the example of the carrot for the horse. You got to get the carrot not up too close and not 50 yards away. You've got to get the carrot just the right distance where they want to go and pull the cart towards the carrot. So as a teacher, every day as we're making our lessons and we're thinking about new stuff that we're going to create, we have to think, okay, how much is too much? I don't want to overwhelm them. I don't want to make it too easy. I've got to find stuff that's right there in their wheel well, right there in their where they think they can kind of figure it out. And if they think they can figure it out, they'll be willing to try. The motivation to learn, right? They'll make the accommodations necessary. So that's our job as a teacher from a Piagetian standpoint. We got to create disequilibrium. We got to create the conditions where the students will want to work their way out of that state of disequilibrium. The best thing that I can't do it right now, and I think I might do some things here. I might get a little whiteboard. I don't know. We'll figure that out. But the best thing that you can do, think about this. It's the puzzle books. If you've ever done a word search, you guys know that doing a word search, some of them are really simple. You're trying to find the word, biology, and you've only got 10 letters this way, 10 letters this way, and it goes down. It's pretty easy. You'll find the word biology, right? You guys know what to do. You know the strategies. It doesn't take you long to find these words. But as the number of letters in the puzzle increases, suddenly it gets a little bit more complicated. Okay, it's Sudoku or whatever how you say that. Some of them are really simple. Well, when people have done a bunch of them, they get bored with really easy ones. So you gotta increase the sophistication of the puzzle. Well, that makes the challenge. That's kind of fun. All right, that's what learning is in the classroom. We just got to find the right amount of fun, the right amount of stuff that will challenge the students to think, get them out of their comfort level, out of equilibrium, create a state of disequilibrium, and then give them the tools to get back into a state of equilibrium. That's what we do. That's that constructive nature of learning. That's what Piaget talks about. So that's Jean Piaget, right? So then we talked about Lev Vygotsky. Okay, Vygotsky was a constructivist as well. He relied much more less on biology and more on social experiences. And some of the things that he talked about, and we talked about in class, was this idea of a kind of the buzzwords of Vygotsky is this idea of zone of proximal development. Now, what exactly is that zone of proximal development? I like to think of it as if you think about it on a continuum. Okay, so we have this continuum. My arms are the continuum, right? Um, we have on one end, we have their independent practice level, things that the student can do all by themselves independently. And on the other end of the continuum, we have the things that they can do if they have assistance, if they have a tutor, they have a teacher, instructor, somebody that they're a coach, somebody that they're to help them meet those, to be able to do what we want them to do, right? So we have the independent level. We have what they can do with the assistance of a teacher, coach, or tutor. Then we have this gray area in between. Okay, that's kind of the zone of proximal development. I can do these things, but only if I have a teacher or someone that will help me out with it. Okay, so think about that in practical terms as a teacher. How do I assess somebody's zone of proximal development? Well, the truth is, it's really after the fact. So it's kind of if I have 25 students and I got to test each student and work with every student individually, that zone of proximal development, finding what that ZPD is, uh, kind of cumbersome, kind of lengthy, probably not the best tool for me as a teacher. Now, luckily, what we have is we have a lot of instructional manuals and we have a lot of experience and we take a look at our instructor materials as teachers and we kind of know when students are in fifth grade, sixth grade math, we kind of know the area that they'll struggle with and kind of know where most of the students are. We kind of know the gray area or the zone of proximal development just based on prior experiences, right? So we use that as a reference for us as teachers. Now, what we do as a teacher, from Vygotsky's standpoint, another buzzword is this idea of scaffolding. Now, you guys have heard of the term scaffolding. People use that all the time. What is a scaffolding? Okay. Well, from a construction standpoint, it's easy. Okay. I want to paint the third floor. I can't reach the outside of the building, third floor. I need to create a mechanism put up in place to help me reach the third floor as I paint it. I put up the scaffolding, right? What does that do? So it acts as a support system for me to reach those high floors, right? The same thing in learning. Can't do it by myself. I need support. I need someone to help me. They scaffold me as I go from the low level to the higher levels. Now, we do that in all forms of instruction, from coaching and in teaching. We scaffold our kids all the time. That's not a hard problem. That's the easy part. Helping our students learn how to do new things, that's the fun part of teaching. The trick, as I said in class at one day, was how do I pull the scaffolding away? What happens when I pull the scaffolding away? Right? Well, if I pull the scaffolding away too quickly, that means they do the problem once, they do it twice. I say, you got it. Of course, the kids always say, yeah, I got it. And then you change up the problems and you pull the scaffolding away, and then suddenly the students are like, oh, crap, I don't know how to do this. And they make a bunch of mistakes. Well, what happens then? They make these mistakes and they feel like crap, and they're like, I don't get this. Their self-efficacy drops. They're thinking that their ability to complete a task independently, that drops. So now they're like, I can't do this. So now I got to go to the teacher and I got to get more support. All right. So what happens is, as a teacher, is we pull the scaffolding away too quickly, and they fall and they fail and make mistakes and they don't feel confident in themselves, and now they doubt themselves. Well, that happens. Then the flip side of that is sometimes we stay too long. Students, we enable the students. We say to the students, hey, anytime you need help, anytime you're having an issue, just come and talk to me. And they do all the time, and they never learn how to do something independently. Well, if they never learn how to do it independently, how do I build on that? The constructive nature of learning from Piaget or Vygotsky is they've got to build on prior knowledge. Well, they never stood up on their own 2 feet. So if they haven't stood up on their own 2 feet, then how do I know what their basic independent level is? So that's the real hard part as a teacher is I've got to teach these kids new stuff. But they got at some point in time show me that they've got this new stuff. Once they have that new stuff, then I create a scaffolding, a mechanism to push them up higher. And so that's the fun part of teaching is scaffolding. The hard part is knowing exactly when to pull the scaffolding away and make the kids stand on their own 2 feet or 4 wheels, as my case might be. But that's a joke because I'm in a wheelchair. All right. Anyway, so Vygotsky talks about scaffolding, the importance of scaffolding. It all starts with knowing where they're at, knowing what their schemes are, knowing what they can do, setting an objective, setting a goal for where we want them to be, and then figuring out the curriculum, the teaching methodologies to get them there. Once they get there, they've got to do that a bunch of times independently. That's why we use homework and we use worksheets and we use a lot of stuff. Homework. We ask them to do this stuff independently, show me that they can. Now I know, I feel comfortable that they can do it. Then I go on to the next stage. So Piaget or Vygotsky talks about the idea of the zone of proximal development. He also talks about scaffolding. They both talk about the uses of language, and the book talks about that as well. The use of the language. Piaget might see some of this as being a bit immature. Vygotsky talks about the importance of speech. Essentially, speech you go from a social speech to this private speech, which it really serves as a mechanism to coach yourself, to scaffold yourself. I use the example of putting together a computer table. We pull the box out, we get all the parts out, and as we're doing it, if it's novel, we haven't done it before, we find ourselves saying, okay, A, where's part A? Here's A goes into C. We're talking out loud. Why? Because we haven't done it before. We're coaching ourselves, we're scaffolding ourselves, and we're just talking our way through this process. And as we do this a bunch of times, um, we become less vocal. It turns to an inner speech. We don't need to do that out loud. We just kind of do it, right? So you'll see a lot of times kids are working together on projects, doing things. You'll see how they use speech as a mechanism to scaffold their own learning. Vygotsky also talked about how they differ. Piaget and Vygotsky differ in some ways. Is talking about the social experience. Vygotsky believes that you could speed up cognitive development by putting the kids in the right groups, in the right dynamics where kids that are more advanced are working with younger kids who are less advanced, and through their social interactivity, the social activity, that those kids with less knowledge, less skills, they're going to learn from the more advanced ones, and that you can kind of speed up cognition through putting the right kids together. That makes sense. I mean, there's certainly truth to that. Anytime we're working with people that are more advanced in an area, we learn from them. They show us different ways of doing stuff, and it really kind of can speed up this learning process. Makes total sense. But that doesn't mean that you can speed up cognition to a point where suddenly you go from learning your ABCs to reading Shakespeare in a matter of months, right? There is some biological obstacles, okay, and that's what Piaget really kind of would contend is that there are some roadblocks, there are some obstacles, there are some maturational barriers that are going to stand in the way, and that's why you see those shifts in the stages from pre-operational to concrete to formal. That their ability to think abstractly is a real qualitative shift. You can't just tell the kids to think abstractly. They have to have the ability to think abstractly. Okay, and so that's why something like fractions is oftentimes a real difficult concept for many young kids to understand. You can teach them how to solve multiply 1/4 times 1/4. Okay, you just multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators, you get 1/16, right? They can do the mechanism. They can multiply the fractions. But you ask a third grader, what is a fraction? you might find that they really struggle with the abstract nature of the part to whole relationship to be able to describe that. They just kind of know what to do. They think like, I know what a quarter of a cookie looks like, or I know what half a pizza looks like, or I know what half a glass looks like. They understand fractions in from a conceptual standpoint. What a quarter of a pizza looks like, what a half a pizza looks like, what a whole pizza looks like. But when you start talking about multiplying and adding or dividing fractions, holy crap! Now you're going to find that that abstract nature of proportion suddenly creates some real obstacles. So there is a mechanism in place, and that's kind of like I said. Piaget says, "Hey, you can teach them how to do stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have a real understanding of what it is that they're doing, right?" So as teachers, we have to think about how do we use Piaget, how do we use Vygotsky, okay? And in the book, they give you some strategies at the end of in place as far as what do we do with this, okay? Well, one of the things was if they're both constructivists, that means we got to put them in activities where students have to build on prior knowledge. What does that mean? I got to kind of know where they're at. I got to know what their basic schemes are. I got to know what their experiences are like. I've got to create new experiences that build off of prior experiences. That means when we're talking in history class and we're trying to relate things to wars that took place in Mesopotamia or in Persia, blah blah, and the kids are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, that's probably not going to be a really good example to build from. But you talk about examples that they've either seen movies about or they know of certain battles that have taken place. Well, if you're trying to build on prior knowledge, you got to have a common knowledge to build from. You also have to think about, since it's constructive in nature, we got to put kids together from different perspectives. Kids with different experiences, kids that look at things maybe a little bit differently. Those are great opportunities for kids to build on prior knowledge or to create a whole new body of knowledge. Um, so, having kind of pulled it all back together, the idea is what do we do in our classrooms that will make will put those kids in a position where they'll have to create new schemes. Well, they'll have to make accommodations, that they'll have to, for learning to take place, they'll have to accommodate. Well, we have to set up those conditions. So anyway, that's the first videos. I know it's just kind of a recap of what we did the week before spring break, but I just wanted to kind of get one out there as a first video, kind of get some feedback, see what people have to say, make sure everybody can access the material. Look for a email that I'll send later. I'll send later tonight, and kind of walk through kind of what we're going to do going forward. So this week we're going to start talking about, and we actually have started talking a little bit about some of the behaviorist principles and stuff like that as it relates to learning, and that's kind of where our next video will focus on. All right, have a good night.